reductions in some of these specialty programs and not moving forward in special education. That's what led us to the last override and the need to restore 18 positions. Those all happened. So make no mistake, what you see here in this round, those will be going forward as they did, only worse than prior to the last override.
And I think we have to be careful too when we talk about the money that we got last year. It avoided layoffs, but it wasn't a white horse. There were no teachers added to the middle school, and these classes have been hitting the 30 mark for 3 consecutive years. So while we were rescued from layoffs, we certainly still were in a lot of trouble, and that's why we need the next override to move forward. We're in a cycle of every 3 years the schools need an infusion of cash so that we can plan and give the stability Marcy alluded to. It's not good for a school system to go year to year. But last year, while it kept our heads above water, we certainly were still up in the deep sea, and we need a life raft because these classes of 30, they're here, and they're going to get worse.
And as we promised, the override sustained us for 3 years. It's not going to sustain us for 4, 5, and 6. And I don't think that last year we cried wolf. I think basically we robbed Peter to pay Paul, and that's what we're talking about now, is robbing Peter to pay Paul again. And so even though we were able to get through the 3 years that we hoped we could get through based on the override, we're not going to get through 4, 5, and 6 these next 3 years.
3 years and a contract round, so that was
I think that the cuts we're looking at are the cuts that we've told you we're going to make. They're going to be made, and we don't have any other options, really.
Mrs. Bailey.
Contrary to what you may think, I would say I think that your example just shows the difficulty of the situation and the difficult decision-making process that you face and that we face as voters. And I guess my point in asking that question was more to what Jeff really stressed so articulately, is that if you are going to make a recommendation of cuts and on the other side ask for an override based on avoiding those cuts and enhancing services, short of some unexpected windfall in state aid outside of your control, you need to go through with that, because that's what makes people trust government following through, and that also is what helps people decide on whether to vote for an override, on whether they want to increase their taxes, on whether to maintain the services they value. And if we're going to go through this and then decide the override fails, 4.5 days is just something that's unpalatable to the community, and we're going to close the library instead, and I know that's just an example. Then you haven't been straight with the voters over what their choice is. Or cutting recreation programs, or cutting something in DPW or public safety. You haven't been straight in allowing voters to make the value judgment of what their tax dollars are. And that's why I ask you all to very seriously consider what you come forward with in town meeting. And I know anyone on the floor can come forward with something different, but where you're going to present as a value judgment to the community, that you follow through with that and have 4.5 days of school at a time when MCAS and college admission is getting more competitive, and you hear at the state level and at the national level about extending the school day, and you're going to shut them half a day a week. That's horrifying to me. But if that's what it has to be, I will make my value judgment on whether to vote to increase my taxes based on that, not whether the library is going to be closed. So if it's too what I'm saying is, if that's too horrifying to all of you, that if the override fails, you're going to go back and find some way to rejigger the budget to do something else, do it before we all go through that. Do it before people make value judgments on voting whether to increase their taxes and voting what kind of community they want to go forward. Please, don't wait until the crisis happens and flip it all around. And I understand that if the money comes from outside of your control and you're able to put it back because some Chapter 7 incomes that you weren't expected, and I understand that's outside of your control, but whatever is within your control, make that decision before you ask the voters to vote, and then stick with what the results are.
Well, thank you, Steve.
Yeah, just at our finance team meetings, we kicked all of this around as to the scenarios and what's the best approach, what's the politically political approach that we have to consider as far as asking the general public to support an override in order to fix what we have, which is a structural deficit. Annually, we have a structural deficit that we're facing, for the most part, circumstances that are beyond our control. I mean, the cost of doing business is just like it is for our own homes, whether it be the cost of fuel and home heating fuel and gasoline for the cruisers, the fire trucks, the DPW trucks. It's increased for the general operating expenses for the town also, as well as health insurance costs, and all those other things are well above the 2.5% levy limit in new growth that we're allowed to operate within under the confines of Proposition 2.5. But at the finance team meetings, we kicked around these very scenarios that Bob articulated about earlier as far as what our choices are. And one of the choices was, go in with a budget at town meeting, and if the override fails at the election, come back and tweak it. And I think the general consensus was exactly what you're saying here, which is let's be straight and up front with the public as to what's going to happen and follow through. So what you're hearing is, this is where we're at right now. What you're hearing is what we intend on presenting. If the town meeting were tomorrow, this is what would be presented to you tomorrow as far as the cuts that would be made. I, for one, have no intention of going back to a special town meeting and monkeying around with the budget any further, because it would be very disingenuous for us to be sitting up here and presenting a pitch to the general public and, again, not following through. I've sat here for a lot of years, and this is probably one of the most difficult years. 1991 was tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we closed it.
Cost me an election. But anyway, 1991 was tough.
It wasn't necessarily a bad thing.
That was a good thing for some people's standpoint. But 1991 was very difficult. This is, again, we're at a situation where we're at a critical stage where we can't operate and enjoy and realize the level of services that we currently have right now without an override. So I don't think you're going to see that. I truly believe that collectively, what you see tonight, the town meeting were tomorrow, this is what you would see presented. And this is where the priorities have fallen in relation to the level of services for each given department as to what we believe is the requisite level of services that are going to be delivered. I, for one, have no intention of going back to a special town meeting. With the exception of Chapter 70, if we get more revenue for Chapter 70 down the line, that to me goes to the schools, right there, takes care of it, and that's where it heads. But for the rest of the budget, live with it. If we happen to have, one of the arguments as far as the opposing the 3-year projected budget and 3-year override is, we can't forecast our revenues. We've tweaked our revenue estimates up a little bit from where we normally would be. We're actually been rather conservative over the years, and that's why we see every once in a while we have a little bit of a windfall. That's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with having a little bit of money in your savings account and a little additional free cash. So we've tweaked those revenues up as much as we could comfortably feel we could do it without overestimating our revenues. That being said, if we end up with some additional revenues coming in, there's nothing wrong with carrying that forward to the next year, working with that budget document that we have, for the services that we're looking to provide, because we're pretty comfortable with what we've come up with for a 3-year projection, and let it carry us into year 4 or year 5. Then the public knows exactly what they're getting for their override. The board, again, will probably be in a position shortly to make some sort of a pact with the community as far as, not taxing to the levy limit, taxing only to the level that we need, therefore minimizing the impact on the tax rate and therefore on your tax bill. So all these things have been weighed, and we've kicked it around once a month, then twice a month, and 3 times a month, now 4 times a month. Yeah. To come up with some sort of a scenario that we hope that the public will, as Bob pointed out, trust the fact that, first of all, everybody sitting at the table is a taxpayer. Most of us sitting at the table have kids in the public school system, have had kids in the public system. Those that don't have them in the system anymore have always been committed to the public education that we have here in North Reading as a high priority. And, it's going to impact us just as much as anybody else. And it's not a little bit of money. It's a significant impact. I mean, you're talking about in excess of a 25% increase over a 3-year period on your tax bill. That's a lot to ask people for. So they have a right to know exactly what they're going to be getting, and we have an obligation to tell them and not confuse them by changing our priorities you know, at the 11th hour, or not the, excuse me, at the 25th hour, after the fact. Because that's not fair, it's disingenuous, and we've spent an inordinate amount of time projecting out what our needs are going to be, what our costs are gonna be, over the next 3 years. So I think you have a pretty fair picture. And again, there's no fluff here. We're talking about an increase in services on the general government side, pretty much just in the fire department. But again, as was already articulated, for public safety reasons, for the safety of the firefighters, for the safety of the general public, enhancement of a service that, which is not a bad thing, which can generate some revenue and help offset the cost. It's not a total win. On the school side, I'm telling you, I feel for them. I don't know how they're doing, as well as they're doing, educating our youth and getting as much as they can out of these kids with what they have to operate. Level services, the enrollments are going up for the next 3 years. Then it plateaus. And that's what this projected budget is showing. It'll plateau after the 3rd year. And, but that's a good thing, at least for a long time to come.
So much for the bubble.
Trish?
Just a comment, not in particular to the specific budget, but, you know, there's a lot of the issues that are, you know, systemic in the budget problems coming from the state in how education is funded, how municipalities receive revenue from the state. I know that, you know, being a past member of the school committee with the Mass Association of School Committees and the Mass Association of School Superintendents, and, you know, annual meetings and such, and discussions that take place about formulas and how Chapter 70 is arrived at, and what kind of circuit breaker aid is coming, and then, you know, and on top of that, the president's, you know, No Child Left Behind, which aggravates me every time I see him, you know, clap about No Child Left Behind, but, you know, where's the funds? And some of the same from the state. And then, you know, on the municipal side, I know that you all are involved in issues with the state in requesting formula changes and funding for circuit breakers and that. But I think the public needs to hear, not now, not tonight, but over the course of budget sessions and just normal course of business, the public needs to hear more of what you're doing individually as elected officials to, you know, you said at one time, you know, hopefully we can spring some more money, but what conversations and what activities are going on behalf of the citizens of North Reading and the children and the, you know, the taxpayers as to what is happening at the state level. And I don't think we hear enough about that. And I know, you know, from sitting there that it does go on. And I'd just like to, you know, invite you to be more public, I guess, with some conversation as to what those issues are and what you can do to help change them, and what we as taxpayers can get involved in to help some of these situations.
Trish, I'd like to comment. I mean, I'm standing here tonight before a relatively small crowd. I recognize a number of faces that I know would be at every single meeting we ever call. The purpose of tonight's meeting was to try to get this message out to the public. And hopefully, between the transcript and maybe those watching on TV this evening, we'll get some more people interested. It's very difficult, very, very difficult to get this kind of a message out to the public, because even when you advertise, you know, a large crowd. You know, what I'm going to ask everybody that's here is talk it up amongst your associates and see if we can, you know, generate some more interest and more dialogue. And certainly, we would like some feedback. I mean, we're wrestling with, and we do have a little bit of time, not much, between now and when we go to vote on April 30th for this budget. But you know, we're weighing, as you know, a bunch of difficult decisions, and where's the wind blowing? You know, what do people feel the priorities are? And you know, what's our best shot at getting a needed override passed? whether it be 1 year or 3 years.